familiar with it, and certainly there's the URL in full view. So if you do feel like you need to read this, please go to that URL, ietf.org, about notewell.html. We had a little trouble even getting this working, so we're not going to screw with the resolution to try to make it fit better. Hopefully the crop slides work out for everyone. This slide says administrative. We are audio streaming, meet echoing, jabbering, ether padding, and I'm not sure what else. As always, the session's recorded, and it's very important to speak your name clearly into the mic so that we get it for those on audio, for the recording, and for the minute taker. We do have a few people on Jabber, and I'll try to be paying attention to that, although I think many of them are, you're going too fast. Many of them are in the room, actually. So if I miss something, please let me know. Blue sheets should be going around. Normally, people like blue sheets just to keep the right record. Please sign in so we get a bigger room the next time. Thank you. Okay, as we see here, we've done this little transformation, starting as CCAMP and then ending as Keys. And we've also done a chair shuffle. I'd like to at this point thank our outgoing, first our outgoing AD, Adrian. Thank you for looking after us. And unfortunately, we've been able to rope him into being our technical advisor. So we're not getting rid of him just yet. So he, after this week, he'll be formally added as the technical advisor to the working group. So thank you, Adrian, for both the past, the future. Also, of course, we have to recognize our new AD, who is also our ex-chair, Deborah Brungard. She started with CCAMP before I joined CCAMP. Started TEAS very briefly. Thank you very much, and we look forward to your continued contributions and oversight. My new co-chair is Pavan. I think everyone knows him in the group. And our new secretary is Matt, who's taking notes into Etherpad, so feel free to correct his or add to his notes. It seems strange to talk about recent RFCs in a group that's really meeting for the first time. We were actually hoping to have 3 RFCs today. Instead, we have 3 documents in the editor's queue. The slides we wrote before that third document moved from IESG processing to editor's queue. I'd like to thank the authors for being diligent about responding to comments and getting us to that point. So we hoped to have a record of RFCs before the first formal working group meeting. We came pretty close, so this will still look great for our metrics if anyone really cares. So we do have one errata, and that's on the OAM side, and there's an off by 1 bug in the IANA considerations. Basically, it had a value that you can't represent with the number of bits available. Those damn computer scientists, starting at 0 rather than 1. Anyway, next. We do have one document that we've been waiting on some edits from the authors. I actually, did we get those edits? They might have just come in. No, they didn't make, okay. All right, so that was me being optimistic. You want to say it? Name first, please.
Hi, Oscar González, Telefónica. Yes, just minor updates are missing from the SRLG Collect, which as soon as we have found time, we make them.
Okay, great. So we look forward to that soon. Next. As always, I want to remind everyone we have a formal IPR process where we poll for IPR before adoption and before last call and publication request. As always, please use the mail list. It's really important. You're going to probably hear a couple of us say this a couple of times during the meeting, particularly for, and this applies both for individual documents and working group documents. It's really important to discuss changes when you make them and discuss them with the working group. You can wait to this meeting, but it's better to do it on the list because not everyone can make it into the room, and we don't have as much time here as we do on the list. So if you're making changes, if you think you want to make a change, particularly to a working group document, please discuss it on the list. This is actually a sad note. We wanted to pause a moment to remember our friend and colleague who we just learned this week passed after being sick for a while. And Ping was a great friend and colleague here. I personally worked with him starting in the late 90s when he was in Juniper on RSVP, and we all will certainly miss his technical insight and his energy. So, okay, we'll now move on to document status.
This is a collection of the status updates that we received from the authors of the working group documents. The fast LSP's requirements, the authors believe that there are no open issues, and they're looking for further working group review and comments on this. As far as GM plus LSP fast readout draft is concerned, it was adopted in the TEAS working group in December. There are no open issues as of now, and the authors are looking for additional working group review and comments. The interconnected TE info exchange draft came in from the CCAM working group. The 01 version of the TEAS draft had some security considerations text added to it. There's a 02 version that got published recently. It had a few edits that are kind of discussed in the next slide. As far as pending work and issues are concerned, there are no more TBD entries in this, no more edit notes. There was this question on the mailing list about whether this is really standards track or whether it should be moved to informational. The authors actually don't care. I'm just reading what we got. As far as the changes in the latest revision are concerned, there's now a section for mutual exclusivity. There's the section on dynamic abstraction has been filled in. The section on address management has been filled in. There's a new section called notes on the solution. The section on manageability considerations has also been filled in. There are a few minor tweaks done to the security consideration section, and some typos also got fixed in the process. As far as the work plan is concerned, they would want to remove stuff as much as they can and then claim that the draft is complete. They should be ready for working group last call pretty soon.
So you'll notice that got a few slides. This has been a hot topic in the past when we were CCAM. The previous one, but that's all right. So the question is does anyone have any additional comments they'd like to make before the document moves to the last call? That's good to hear. Please take an extra look at the document, and we'd like to move it forward.
As far as the network assigned upstream label draft is concerned, it also came from the CCAM working group. There was one comment that Zafar wanted to get addressed. It got pushed in a recent revision. There were some comments about adding more clarity on the mailing list. The authors would do that. Apart from that, there aren't any other open issues, and the authors are looking for further review from the working group. For the P2MP loose path reoptimization draft, another draft that came in from the MPLS working group, there are no open issues, and the authors would like to request working group last call for this as well. So please do review it and send your comments onto the mailing list. Same with the RSVP egress protection draft. The authors believe that they have addressed all the comments that were previously made. They believe it's ready for working group last call, so any comments on this are also welcome. The same cannot...
Just curious on that document, how many people have read this document, egress protection? All right, so that's a good number. It's really important on all the documents that are requesting last call that now is a good time to take an extra look at those documents, and it's really important to send in any comments that you may have. And because it's good to resolve any major issues before we get to last call and before we're sort of surprised at the end. Thank you.
For the RSVP ingress protection, there is an open issue that needs to be resolved. There are currently two methods that are being discussed in this document for a backup ingress to get information to provide protection for the primary ingress. So the question that we have is there a plan to get it resolved? And if so, what is it? Can one of the authors give a quick update on it?
Any of the authors? Can you come to the mic? We need the mic, please, just because we are streaming.
So first we try to resolve within among the authors. So if we cannot resolve, maybe we go to next step, maybe go to list for discussions.
I missed the one word, go to the next step. I just couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
I think first we try to resolve this issue, so among the authors and contributors, and then if we cannot resolve this issue, maybe we can go to the list.
Since it's a working group document, it's actually even more appropriate to have that discussion with the authors on the list, because we really have to have working group consensus behind whatever decision. So if you have it privately first and then come to the list, you're going to have the same conversation again.
Yeah,
and
okay.
that's okay. That's okay. But you have to get the working group to agree on a change in a working group document. So I'd say start the conversation or pick it up now on the list, and let's see where we go.
Okay, yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The RSVPT domain subobjects document, the fate of this has always been tied to the PSUP version of this document. The authors now believe that this document set is ready to progress to the next step. TE Express path draft, it has been stable for a while now. The companion documents are also progressing very well. There are no open issues, and the authors would like to see this progress as well to the next logical step. So please do, if you have any questions or comments on that, please do.
I just drove from Huawei. When this document was earlier in MPLS, I think I sent some comments. I just noticed that those are not handled. I'll just quickly reply to that. There is an edit. The calculation of packet loss is little incorrect, and I checked that needs to be fixed. So there are a few little points that needs to be fixed in the document before it can move to last call. I'll send that to the list as well.
The RSVPT SRG collect document, its current status is working group last call complete. There are a few ID nits that need to be taken care of, and then it would progress to AD review and move towards publication. The T metric recording draft, it's waiting on the SRG collect draft to get done. The reasoning there is that the same comments would apply to this draft as well. So once the SRG draft goes through the process, this would follow suit. That's all we have. Matt has a comment.
Matt Hartley. On the SRG collection draft, Deborah was the document shepherd for that, but she's now the responsible AD. Does that mean we need a new shepherd, or it does? Okay.
I'm the shepherd. I'm the new shepherd.
Moving on to Dieter. As has been the case this week with Meet Echo, there is a box on the floor and speakers. You're requested to stay in the box, but you know some people like being out of the box.
Okay, I will try to stay within the box. Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dieter Berl. I'm one of the editors of the diversity draft. And as you can see on the next slide, we have 17 supporters or contributors that contributed to this work item, and you can see there's quite a lot of support regarding this work item. Agenda is we did some changes with respect to the previous version based on some comments that we received at the IETF 91 in Honolulu, and then there are next steps. So the comments, the review comments that we received at IETF 91 were it was not clear what the forwarding equivalent class is supposed to be in this draft, so we added some explanatory text regarding this issue, and we also added a reference to RFC 3209. Then there was another... Yeah.
Lou Berger as contributor. Does 3209 use the term RSVP FEC?
It uses the term FEC, right?
All right, I'm embarrassed. I believe I'm a co-author on 3209. I don't remember it using the term FEC.
Okay.
And if
I will echo that back to Zafar, who added that.
Yeah, my feeling is that this is not the right place to be adding an architectural term. Oh, Adrian's going to correct me and tell me I have a terrible memory.
Yeah, I can do this. This is Adrian. I'm your technical advisor.
You sure?
The set of packets that are assigned the same label value by a specific node are said to belong to the same forwarding equivalence class FEC. Section 1.1 of 3209.
I stand corrected and withdraw the comment. Thank you. It's good that we have a technical advisor.
Yeah. Then there was a second review command about the processing that we're describing in the diversity draft, and the question was whether all the nodes in the domain or in the network need to actually look at the diversity information field or sub-object, and we clarified that. So only those nodes that actually do path computation need to look at the diversity information that's being carried in the RSVP message. And typically this is the ingress node that does path computation, and only those nodes have to actually process it. Well, before you switch to the next slide, we also get a number of comments regarding the IANA section, and we cleaned that up. There are the DI values that are defined in this draft, so those values are actually listed here, and we removed all the other suggested values, and we also cleaned up the IANA section based on the guidelines that are provided in RFC 5226. Next slide. So what are the next steps? So we're still asking for review comments from the group. We don't believe that there are any open issues right now, and the editors of this draft are of the opinion that the idea is ready now for a working group last call. Thank you.
Comments? One thing I noticed as going through it is that there's an awful lot of shoulds and shoulds.
Okay.
You know, in using 2119 conformance language. Okay. Almost everything's a should. So I read it and I almost felt like, can I just put on a spec sheet that I'm conformant and be conformant with this document? Because everything's a should, and if I choose not to do it, well, that's okay, because I still comply. So I think it would be very good to go through the document and figure out what things you really, really need to be shoulds versus a must for someone implementing the document. Because I think we will end up with this degree of shoulds. I think we're going to end up with interoperability issues.
Okay.
I mean, remember the point of this is to have interoperable implementations, and if everything's a should and you have lots of options, things aren't going to work particularly well together.
Yeah.
So I'd ask that before we even consider going farther, to really scrub the document and remove as many shoulds or mays as possible, unless there's a good reason for it. Thank you.
Once we've done that, we should submit a new version and then
Discuss it on the list.
Discuss it on the list.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
please. Just drag it over. And then okay, that's good.
Okay, hello everybody. This is Hamian, and I'm going to present this draft on R3PT signaling procedure for end-to-end GMPRS restoration and resource sharing. So next, please. Yeah, firstly, we give a very brief overview of this draft. This draft is labeled as informational draft, and we do not have any objective on protocol extension. And the target of this draft is to clarify the signaling procedure for the restoration RSP association. And we also discuss how to use the SE flag and how this kind of RSP setup and teardown will bring the effect on the service in the optical network, especially for the resource sharing scenario. And finally, we give the BCP summary of the signaling procedures for both actually restoration and reversion. And in this document, we focus just on the end-to-end GMPRS recovery and reversion. So this draft was adopted November last year after the last IETF meeting. So there are a few use cases covered in this draft, and the first section, there are basically two branches. The first one is restoration, and the second is reversion. So in the RSP restoration, we have three subsections, including the 1+R, 1+1+R, and the corresponding resource sharing during the restoration procedure. And for the RSP reversion, we also have two different mechanisms. One is the so-called make before break reversion, which is proposed in a lot of previous work. And the other is to use make while break reversion to shorten the interpretation on the existing RSP during the reversion case. Next, please. So there are quite much changes from last IETF because this was originally merged from two individual drafts. And but most of the techniques are stable, and we only deploy some editorial changes. So we firstly remove the redundant text in the overview description, and we also add some explanation text with respect to the relationship of RFC 6689, which is talking about the RSP association. After that, we have removed some table which repeat how to use the ingress and the egress nodes and during the resource sharing RSP setup. And we also combined a few use case, a few scenarios, including the RSP setup with same or different tunnel IDs into one section. We think there are a lot of things common, and we do not need to repeat it in different sections. And finally, we have some other editorial and the cleanup change. So yeah, the change looks quite a few, but actually we believe the technical is quite clear and stable. So we do not have any open issue at this moment, but we would like to present here and collect the review comments from the working group. Thank you.
Out of curiosity, how many have read the new version? Not the old version, but the new version. Okay, so there's a few. Anyone want to comment on the new version? No. So this version is a lot of, there's been a lot of changes. It's almost a new document, at least through the first half. I'd say keep in mind what the purpose of the document was, which was as a informational document, and make sure that you're keeping it informational. If you feel like you really want to do some of the things that it says of completely document procedures that aren't documented, or change procedures, then it's no longer an informational document. And if you look at the introduction, it seems like you're getting ready to do a clarification document of where you change procedures versus sort of clarifying what everyone does or making clear what is done commonly. You have to make sure that you choose whether you're a informational BCP or proposed standard. And the intro doesn't seem to match the body, the technical pieces.
Okay, I will check that, but I believe that technically it is still a clarification of the existing procedure, and we do not want to bring anything new to the protocol or anything like that.
Okay. I think the new intro needs a lot of work for it to be an informational document. So we can work that offline maybe a little bit. Thank you.
This is an update on the model that we've been working on for representing and manipulating T topologies. These are the folks that have been involved in this effort. I'll be presenting this on their behalf. We would also like to acknowledge Sue Harris, Mason Kadam from Cox, Zafar Ali, and Lou for participating in some of these discussions and providing some valuable inputs. There's also a link up there for where you can find the latest working version of this model. Next slide, please. This is an overview slide that highlights some of the salient aspects of this model. So in the December interim meeting, we were tasked to come up with a technology agnostic T topology model. We believe that we have produced one. There are some bandwidth specific link attributes that some may classify as packet centric, but apart from that, everything else should be strictly technology agnostic. Apart from the T topology building blocks, the model also captures the overlay and underlay relationship between for nodes and links. It also gives the flexibility to specify time scheduling parameters for topological elements. And last but not the least, it also facilitates this notion of T topology as a service, where you could have a provider network abstract its topology and provide abstract views to each of its clients. Next slide, please. The topology building blocks themselves should be fairly generic and extensible, meaning any technology-specific topology model can take these and augment it to suit their needs. As it should cover all your favorite current generic T-link attributes. If there's anything amiss, please do let us know and we'll add that in. As far as generic T-node attributes are concerned, we did add in a generic connectivity matrix. It should be extensible. The optical folks should be able to take that and augment it to suit their needs. The model also allows each topological element to have multiple T information sources. So the T information source can be IGP3, BGPLS, user-defined, or anything that you want it to be. So each T information source is associated with a credibility preference for the sake of determining precedence. So the model allows you to build a T topology using elements that comprising elements that you learned via a single T information source, or you could build a T topology with elements that you learned via multiple information sources. For example, you have a T topology which was built using by elements that you learned via OSPF, and then you say you import topological elements into that topology from a different T domain via BGPLS. So the newly imported elements would have the information source pointing to BGPLS, while the native elements would still point to SPF. Next slide, please. The model captures, as I said, the overlay and underlay relationship for nodes and links. So if you have a set of hierarchical T topologies, you should be able to start with a specific topological element in the topmost topology and then drill your way down to the supporting underlay topological elements in the bottommost topology. Next slide, please. This is just an illustration of what I just said. So if you can take a T-link EF in topology blue, look at its underlay topology, get the corresponding underlay path, and then work your way down to the bottommost topology. Next slide, please. The model also gives you the flexibility to add time scheduling parameters. So in the abstract T topologies that I will be talking about in a minute, the provider would be able to present different topological views to the client at different time slots. This is a fairly generic construct. We don't see it staying in this document for long. It's just there because we don't have any other placeholder. Next slide, please. So the model allows you to it frustrates this notion of T topology as service, meaning a given provider network can abstract its network and provide different abstract views to its client. The abstract topology is typically decoupled from the actual topology, and it comprises of elements that are taken from the client namespace. So when the abstract topological elements actually make their way into the client topology, they still have some indication of whether the element is still abstract or not. So the clients, if they desire to, can go request changes to be made for these topological elements. Next slide, please. This is just an illustration of how a provider network can create multiple abstract topology views. Next slide. When we presented the abstract T topology model in Honolulu, we had our building blocks augment the generic network topology building blocks that were defined in GraphClam. There were some concerns raised about that. So when we were asked to come up with the generic network T topology model, we decided not to tie our fate with that draft. So we wanted to wait until GraphClam evolved sufficiently, and I believe it's reached a stage where it has evolved sufficiently, and we would like to revisit that. And this is an item that's open for discussions. So we would like to go ahead and do the augmentation with that model, but we would like the working group to chime in. In terms of additions to the document itself, we would like to add this notion of incremental notifications. There's also been some requests to add a section for use cases. We intend to do that. That's all we have currently. We believe it's at a stage where it can be adopted and worked on collectively by the working group. So that's it.
Pavan, can I ask a clarifying question? This is Lou. When you say use cases, do you mean use cases or examples? Because I had previously heard a discussion of some examples. I don't remember a discussion of use cases.
Okay. Examples of how you use the model was the request.
Okay. Use cases are things that drive functionality. Examples are
so that was a badly worded sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
they want the request was to basically be a bit more pedantic and explain how the model can be used.
Thank you. Okay. Questions?
Paul Doolan, Corient. Questions or comments?
Whatever you want.
Whatever I want. Okay.
So the mic is open.
The mic's open. This is good. I'm happy to see this work here. There is similar work in other places, so you need to pay. It would be good to pay attention to that. I'd also like you to encourage you to pay attention to Scott's presentation later. I did have a list of things that worried me. You addressed one of them at least, and then Lou addressed the other. but I'll go back to it. I don't quite understand this distinction between provider topology and abstract topology. In a hierarchical situation where you've got recursive exposure of topology, it seems to me it's a topology and that's it. So that's something that
we did take the point. You did mention that earlier. So we made some changes to the model. So the GitHub if you go to the GitHub location pointed in the first slide, you should see some changes that would address your comment. So you shouldn't see any split for a provider and abstract network anymore.
Okay. And one other thing, if I may, I agree. I liked your request for clarification there because I find data models extremely terse, and I think it would be very helpful to have a document. I don't mind a document if it has use cases in it, but certainly something that helps explain how to use it. Perhaps that could be a separate document or a section of this one.
Thank you.
Thanks.
First mic, please.
Hi, Xian from Huawei. I like the work in general, but I have two comments. I see one is actually already there, so I would like to see kind of like example or applicability, how the data model you expect to use. Okay. The other one is some of the probably is detailed to the model. The schedule, I don't know, it should be essential part of T topology, or it's some future you should actually put out from.
It will go away. It's just there for now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good general topic. I think that we could talk about. I think two big open issues with what we have here is covering things that are not fully in standards. Are they in? Do we include those in the model? Do we not? Clearly, anything that's not backed up by an existing standard needs explicit discussion in the working group. The other thing is making sure that we can tie in appropriately switching technology specific elements. What we're doing here in T is supposed to be generic across any technology. MPLS and CCAMP are supposed to work on the technology specifics. So we have to make sure that we can properly augment the model, separate and augment the model to support that going forward.
And the authors believe that in its current state, it should be technology-specific models should be able to augment the building blocks.
In the previous version, there's a new version out there I know, but in the previous version, there was at least packet-specific still in the model. And that should be done as an augmentation.
Okay.
Okay. Igor Briskin, I'm one of the members of the design team. I'd like to answer Paul's question with respect to the difference between provider and abstract topologies. Okay, so semantically there are no differences, and as far as all attributes, they're all the same. But there's an important difference between provider and abstract topology. First of all, this is not a term which is global to whole hierarchy. It's only between adjacent people in the hierarchy. And abstract topology is the one that provider basically cooks for the client. Okay, so he has full responsibility, and the client is supposed to fully interpret it, and to the point that it can do path computation. Okay. While provider topology, it is exactly as it's known to provider himself. Okay, so it is basically for the client. It is not really safe to perform path computation directly on provider topology because there could be many elements that are proprietary and the client may not understand. Okay, so but there is a very important use for such topologies. Like for example, you can specify loosely how do you want to route your services without basically providing explicit paths. You also can do what Pawan described as zooming, basically to go on a particular link, zoom it to the underlay topology and go further along the hierarchy. But again, the difference is that if I get an abstract topology cooked for me, I can do my path computation and then request services based on my path computation, while it is not really safe to do it directly on provider topology.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Because I heard two different things from two different authors here. One author talked about, so Igor, you just, I don't know if you want to come back to the mic. You just talked about being able to show, provide a topology to your client, but also understand what's happening at layer the operator is operating at. That's terrible. Sorry, the provider is operating at. In the first version of the document, that was the distinction was provider versus abstract was the terminology used for that. Pavan said that earlier that the provider that terminology has changed or has been eliminated. Is there still a capability to do what you've just said, or has it been eliminated as it seems that that Pavan implied?
Well, I think you misunderstood what Pawan said. I think the distinction is still there. Okay, the only thing that we were basically arguing about how to call the provider topology. So my personal preference was to call it actual topology versus abstract topology. Okay, and we discussed that actual is too convoluted and overloaded term. So we basically decided to call it provider topology. But basically, in a nutshell, the difference is that provider topology it's exactly like I know it. As a provider, okay, whether through my IGP or through my own providers or whatever, and the abstract topology it is how I cooked this topology in order to satisfy the client's needs.
Maybe we should give Pavan a chance to answer
so
also.
So we don't use those terms anymore. Forget provider topologies completely. All you have right now is if you look at a topology that you might have, if you have topological elements that you learned via something that a provider provided in abstract TE terms, there will be an indication, there's a flag for that T-link which says whether it's abstract or not. And that's all that we have. We don't branch in terms of provider versus abstract anymore.
I'm not seeing Igor nod his head.
Well, basically, it is still under discussion, right? But for example, it is important that if I'm a user of this topology and I use this model as a target to extract the depository, right? And then basically, once I got it, I can do whatever I want with this topology. Okay, so the distinction is important. Okay, so if I got abstract topologies which are cooked for me, I can use them and I can route and I'm supposed to fully interpret it.
And the distinction is provided by a flag in the each associated with each topological element. There's nothing in that model which says this is provider and this is not provider.
No, so would you expect when a topology is being provided that everything be marked is abstract, or would you expect a combination of is abstract and not abstract? So you would have a combination of a client view and the service provider view in the same provided model?
So if say you have a client P topology and then a provider exported an abstract view of the other, can you go to the other picture? The last but one. Keep going. So this is the provider network.
So slide 8.
It's trying to give an abstract view of what it has to multiple clients. So these elements that are depicted here is the abstract T topological elements. So each of those elements will have a flag saying that it's an abstract element. So these will potentially go plug into a client T topology, which will have real provider as it sees itself. And in that case, there will be a mix of non-abstract T links and abstract T links.
Youngli, Huawei, I think this is good work. I support this work. I have a couple of comments. One is, after reading this document, it wasn't clear for me whether you are talking about topology abstraction on the controller device or controller and up to the ultimate, customer level. And I support a recursive model if possible, but document doesn't make it clear which one or if both encompass both into recursive manner. I think that might be spelled out so that we understand the scope.
Yeah, an appendix of how the model can be used will definitely help. It is definitely recursive.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it should cater to the use case that you just talked about.
Okay. Okay, and another one is about connectivity matrix. There are many ways to design at the Yang level. We want to make sure that that container you define on connectivity matrix can be augmentable. If it is too much embedded with other stuff, it may be very difficult. So I just want to have some dialogue between CCamp and TIS on technology-specific issues on Yang, so that we can have feedback loop. Is that understandable?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually, that first comment very much resonated with me. I read the document, and I'm like, okay, where's the intro?
Exactly. And I also echo to Paul's comment. I think we need to have some kind of information model within the document or separate, I don't care, but kind of understandable, because I think I know this topic, but when I read it, I was lost. So there's some sentiment to make sure that we understand, so that we're on the same wavelengths before we get into deeper discussion on details.
So I think the model is should be expandable enough. So, for example, we wanted it. It was meant to be a preparation for all kinds of augmentations. The connectivity matrix is one of the elements that could be augmented to technology specific thing. Okay. Now versus basically, I think provider versus actual topology. It's a very interesting discussion, and I think we need to continue that. Okay. My comment is just to have a flag, whether it's abstract link or not abstract link, it's not sufficient, because, for example, when you look into hierarchical topologies, somewhere downstairs you can still see abstract links. Okay. But for example, to my immediate client, okay, I need to see that the topology as a whole, whether it's abstract or not, and underneath it could be basically you can still see abstract links. So this flag should be on per topology, not per node or link level. Okay, so there are two different things: provider versus actual provider versus abstract topologies, and abstract versus actual element.
So what I'm hearing is it would be useful to split the abstract pieces separately.
Right. In a separate document?
Or a separate...
I don't think you heard it in a separate document.
No.
I think what you heard was, let's continue the discussion.
No, I said let's continue the discussion, and I also said that let's split, say, the flag where abstract versus actual for element. It's one thing which is an attribute for node and element, and there is also basically provider versus abstract as a whole for topology.
Yeah. Last comment.
Yeah, Dieter Beller, Alcatel-Lucent. I also think that this is a good starting point, this document. I also would like to echo a bit what some others have already said. I think it would be good to have an introduction section where you actually define the information model, and then based on that, I think you can then derive well the tree structure and also all the attributes that should be in that data model.
Okay. Oh well.
Hi, Jose Mainfina. So I have a question on the scheduling parameters you have. It seems like the intention is to enable the higher layers to actually provide a different view at different point of time, right? So does it mean that my T database needs to have a history of the different views at different point of time? I mean, I have not seen any draft which actually talks about how do you actually how do you design your T database, what kind of structure you should have to enable this function. So this is like, I'm not sure how does it, where does it come from?
Yeah, it was meant for the abstract T topologies discussion, but yeah.
No, I'm saying, is it the right place to discuss this thing in Yang model?
It's not. But as I said earlier, it's there just because we don't have any other placeholder.
So we should have another draft. No.
Agree.
So let's talk procedural for a moment. This document's a product of a working group design team. What we had said when we chartered this activity is that the objective was to have a draft available in Dallas. We're here in Dallas. We have a draft, well, the previous one. And the question is, does this continue as individual work, or do we bring it into the working group and say, okay, this is a sufficient starting point, and now the group as a whole can contribute rather than just the design team. And that's a procedural question, and it's a question for the room right now. From my standpoint, the design team has delivered on its charter objective, which is to give us a draft that's a sufficient starting point. So I'd like to hear from the room if there's any reservation for taking this document in as a working group document rather than a design team document, closing the design team, and saying now we have a foundation for the working group as a whole to continue work, continue discussion. Clearly this is not a finished product and there's some major changes going on and will continue to go on. But does that go on as individual work or as working group activity? That's the question on the table. I'd like to hear if there's any reservations for bringing it into the working group and making this the foundation for the working group activity in this area.
Eric Osborne, level 3. I don't have reservations about pulling it away from a design team and going to the working group, but the next 4 or 5 slots are all very similar Yang-ish things. You may not need a design team, but you're going to need some kind of coordination so we don't end up with 6 really good documents at the end of the process that all talk about 80% the same thing.
So I agree with you completely. The cool thing is this is the only one on topology. The other ones don't cover topology, so this one is easy.
Okay.
You're exactly right on the other ones. Yeah. Those are going to be hard.
Okay.
We're lucky with this one.
All right, good enough.
Jeff Haas, so it's the only one in topology in this working group.
Sorry, I should say it's the only one on traffic engineering topology.
Right, but sort of the related follow-up I have to ask, in I2RS land is that we have a model that obviously is going to have a lot of overlap here. At some point, we probably should either throw our requirements into your module that are not actually present in ours, or vice versa. It makes no sense for the IETF as a whole to have a significant overlap in topology models with very slightly different use cases. Let's do the work unified once. So
did you hear what Pavan said earlier?
I was unfortunately out of the room for the majority of the presentation.
He said the hope is to make this an augmentation to your model.
Paul Doolan, Corient. I like the idea of more of the group being able to contribute, so having something as a working group draft that we can all work on is a good idea. Given the discussion we've had this morning, the question I would ask you then, Lou, is if we did that, how do we deal with, there was at least one suggestion to split it up or to create other documents that cover parts of this problem space that are not addressed here. How would that be impacted?
I certainly hope that we end up with, that's the word I was looking for, that we produce a single TE topology core model. That's what I see as the focus of this document. I think anything that is not part of that core model needs to be split out, and where appropriate, go to the appropriate working group. But the purpose of this effort is a single core TE topology document.
Sam from Huawei. I don't have strong objection, but I do have some reservations because Pawan actually mentioned that it's a generic topology model going into other working group. In principle, if people are thinking, you have a generic, you have TE, then you're supposed to augment from there. But if we decide as a working group, say we're not going to do that, I'm okay with that. But we probably need to see, we have a good reason.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so Pavan stated, and I think Jeff asked the same question, who's chair of I2RS, and Sue cheered in the back, who's also co-chair, that the plan is, right now, is to make our model that we produce here, the TE topology model, augment the generic topology model.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
Okay. Another one is I slightly prefer if we add the examples of how to use the model. After that, we consider adoption.
So if we say that, right now it's an individual document. So the back pressure there is we won't accept it until you do X, Y, Z. But I sort of feel like, personally, and this is, hat off, that we're getting to the point where there's enough there that's good enough that it's a foundation, and we know there's a lot of work to be done, and they've already said they're going to do that. So I don't think it's a necessary hurdle.
When I say I like the work in general, as I said, so but I actually how to say some of the information in the tree which I may not fully agree. So when if I see the applicability, the use case, the how to say not use case, the examples, I can comment better and to see if actually I in general agree with them what they want to put inside. That's what I'm to say.
So from a procedure standpoint, I think there's going to be a lot of things like what you just said from a lot of different people. So I think from a procedure standpoint, I think we should go forward with a poll on the list. I'm not even going to ask for hands here. We're going to go forward with a poll on the list, and during that poll, we'll make it clear that we want to hear, one, is this a good enough foundation, and two, what things would you like to see done once it becomes a working group document? And we'll capture what you're saying, what lots of other people are saying, and frankly what I think too. I'll put that in there also. And we'll go from there, and we'll have a nice action open list to work on.
Okay, good for me.
All right. So we are actually now, we started out ahead of schedule. Now we're a little behind schedule on this one, so we should jump to the next one. And here we do have some overlap on the models being presented for the next, well, there's 4 presentations, 3 of which have some overlap, I think. Did I put the wrong one? Yeah. No, don't do, just do it there because it's wide. Yeah, the projector has a problem with anything that's wide format. It won't show it normally in projector mode. So just page down, move the mouse over there, page. Okay. Just go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Tariq Saad. I'm from Cisco Systems. I'm presenting today on Yang models for TE and RCPTE tunnels and interfaces. I'm presenting on the behalf of team members, multi-vendor, and currently the work that we're doing is driven in 2 separate drafts. One is describing the basic TE Yang model, and the other is RZP extensions to this TE basic model. Next slide, please. Okay, figure that. So let me go over an overview of the presentation today. I'll talk about the objective motivation of the work. I'll give a brief update on the progress, deeper dive on the model definition, some discussion at the end, and next steps.
And if you can compress by 5 minutes, it'll take 10 minutes for the whole thing,
okay,
if possible.
I'll try.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So a little bit on the motivation of the work. Back in Honolulu IETF 91, there were multiple parties interested in defining the MPLS-TE models. A group of an unofficial group of design team group spun off, and the objectives of this group was to coordinate the effort and move faster to working group adoption and implementation ultimately. We wanted to define a modular structure encompasses, it's extensible and as much as possible to be data plane agnostic and augmentable for the different signaling protocols. We will talk more about that in later slides. The next thing we kept in mind is we wanted helper submodules to hold reusable derived data types that future modules can import and not have to redefine again. So allows maximum reusability of derived data types. Next slide, please. So this is something we proposed back in MPLS working group back in Honolulu. This is a structure of, so basically we were thinking about some base types that would hold the common MPLS base types. You will see a lot of MPLS here because it was targeted initially at MPLS. Some signaling specific, protocol signaling specific types that would be grouped in those modules, and then again the module itself that defines the configuration operation elements. We were thinking about a base module that will be augmented by RGPTE or LDP or static, and then you would have the base TE can be augmented by RGPTE or segment routing TE or TP for that matter. So we had this thought in our mind and as a roadmap, and we proceeded with this onto our work. Next slide, please. So after giving it a thought, we decided actually that a basic TE model that is data plane agnostic is possibly a better approach. The basic TE model would hang off MPLS base, and it would be augmented by the signaling protocol RGPT in that case, and we would have a packet or data plane per data plane module augmenting the basic RGPT module. And we kept RSVP on its own, a standalone kind of module, because we thought that this is a protocol that could be used for non-MPLS signaling as well. So just to highlight the fact that RSVP was considered as a standalone kind of protocol, not tied with MPLS. Next, please. So let me talk a little bit about what was in scope of our work and later what was out of scope of our work. So the base TE Yang model was in scope, defining P2P and P2MP tunnels there, the configuration, the operation, and the executional RPCs and notification for those, and the augmentation for the MPLS packet to this basic or generic model. We did define the RSVP basic Yang model, and we defined the augmentation to the basic for TE extensions. We still want to tackle some technology extensions for segment routing in our future work. It's not done yet, but we think it will augment the TE basic model again. Next. Thank you. So what was out of scope of our work, any technology-specific augmentation of the TE basic model, which is non-packet. We thought this would be handled in some technology-specific groups. As it stands now, our model is augmentable by such efforts, and we're willing actually to collaborate and if somebody is interested. OAM aspects to our model, they were already being driven by other drafts. We didn't tackle those. Again, other signaling protocols besides RGPTE, we did not tackle those. We know that there were other groups tackling those, so and they will be on their own.
You're pretty tight on time, so
I have to speed it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's out of scope.
Out of scope. Keep going, please. Next. So a little bit on the progress update. We were holding a recurring weekly meeting since IETF 91. All of the team members were attending, and thank you all that you contributed. Our work is kept in GitHub at that address. We have a wiki as well. Next. So this is a very high-level overview of the module structure that we have in mind, and we've tried to implement. In there, we have the reusable helper submodules for packet, for the generic TE types. We have the MPLS base, which is imported by TE and is augmenting, TE is augmenting it. We have our TE-RZP importing the basic and augmenting it. We have the packet importing the generic RCPTE module and augmenting it. So it's the way we've thought of it is as modular and augmentable by different technologies. This is a high-level overview of the detailed model definition. We have this is the TE basic model. We have tunnels, interfaces, some global attributes, and these are the configuration containers. And then we have the operational state, executions, and notification. More details, under the global, we have some global attributes or global parameters defined here. For example, the named admin groups, named SLGs, named paths, named constraints, and these will be applied possibly to interfaces or to tunnels accordingly. You will see under the interfaces we have references back to a named admin group or a named SLG or the SLG itself, and so on. Again, the tunnels and some attributes of the tunnels. It's a list of tunnels keyed by name and type. And we have the P2P and P2MP branch there. This is describing the RZP basic model. You will see that we have globals, we have interface attributes, we have the session operational state, and the interface state, and neighbor state. And this is still the basic RSVP. In the next slide, we will see that we're augmenting the basic RSVP with TE extensions. Again, RSVP TE will import the basic RSVP and the basic TE. And I don't know how much you can read that, but it's trying to augment the TE basic here. And it's augmenting the RSVP model there. Next steps, we want to complete the outstanding work in our current draft with respect to state, RPC, and notifications for whatever we're proposing, TE, RSVP, and RSVT. We wanted to tackle the base MPLS model. I'm not sure if that will be in TEs or somewhere else. We're still debating what goes into the base model because we will have per signaling, per protocol module. So what goes in generic MPLS base? Next, the team wanted also to tackle the MPLS TP and MPLS static modules. I still have one slide, but I can take your questions if you want.
I will wait.
You'll wait? Thank you. Open items, what goes in MPLS base? I did mention that. We did meet with the OpenConfig authors, who are proposing a draft in MPLS working group. We have similar thoughts. We will continue to work with them to align as much as possible. And we look to the working group chairs and the working group for feedback on our model and how to proceed if you have some comments. And thank you.
Jeff, as a very brief comment, you had left things, like GMPLS, et cetera, out of scope, which I understand that makes sense at this point of the effort. But it's my impression from the structure of your module that this is the appropriate place for some of these augmentations to be done. Obviously, you want to keep this in mind not only for IETF, but please keep in mind that other standards organizations at some point may need to augment this stuff, and we don't really have procedures set aside for such things. So this may be a opportunity to engage the Yang doctors specifically to start figuring out how do we leave things open for other SDOs.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm going to look to Anis, who's may not have heard that comment, but I'd hope he would bring that into also the routing area Yang design team, that particular question. And maybe there's some other members in the room as well, maybe. Okay, We actually covered two presentations there. So that was both of Tariq's slots. So that was 5 and 6 combined. I think before we can make any real decisions on how to proceed as a working group, we have to see how this and the other related models come together. And that's really the big question that I have for across these three presentations, and I don't think it's fair just to apply it to you. I'd like to apply it to all three.
Sure. We welcome comments from the working group, and ultimately we want to continue the work and then go for working group adoption. We welcome the group to adopt our draft.
Yeah, and certainly one of the tensions here is we know that MPLS is the driver for a lot of the work, but we need to make sure it covers the full scope of TEAS, which is all the different traffic engineering technologies that are in our scope in the area. And so don't forget about the other technologies and making sure that they plug in. And also remember that the GMPLS control plane applies to PSC, applies to packet. So it is actually the more general case versus MPLS being the more general, MPLS for packet being the more general case. And so one of the big issues going forward is which is the one, who's augmenting who? You don't have to answer that. I'm saying that's a question for the group. Next. Oh.
Hello, my name is Ina Mine. I'm from Google, and I'm presenting. Don't do that to me. I'm going to talk about an MPLS Yang data model. Yes, another one. This is the product of the Open Config Network Operator Working Group. So, what is the Open Config Working Group? Next slide, please. It's an informal working group consisting of operators from a large spectrum area. And the primary goal of this group is to enable programmable network infrastructure. So to this end, the group is working on models, documentation that goes along with these models, and various tools. And many of you are aware of other efforts that are happening from this Open Config group. For example, the BGP model and the policy model are two of these efforts. Next slide, please. Next. So, keeping in mind the goal that is to provide programmable network infrastructure and the composition of the group, here are some of the key ideas that are behind all of these models that are produced by Open Config. First of all is model-driven configuration. So model-driven configuration is a good thing because it enables programmability for the network, and it enables very efficient management.
Give me a second, sorry.
You didn't do this to the other presenters.
We knew you could handle it.
All right. The second thing is the models tend to strive to be vendor neutral. So rather than going with a particular configuration model of one particular vendor, the idea is to go with something that is more focused on what is the functionality that you're trying to achieve, and therefore it is vendor neutral. The focus is on use cases. So the model is shaped through the use cases. We have real problems that we're trying to solve, and as a group, these are guiding, what the models look like. So deliberately, these models are not supposed to be exhaustive in their coverage. They're supposed to be extensible in a way that is not, too hard, but they're not supposed to be exhaustive in coverage. And finally, telemetry is a very, very important thing. It's a key component, and it has to be included in the models. So operational state has to be included in the models, and maybe some of you are aware of the draft that Anissa was presenting on operational state the other day. Next, please.
Can I ask a question about the previous slide? Kiriti Compiler. So being vendor neutral is a good goal, but it might end up being least common denominator. So how do you deal with that? And I know it's not a question for you.
So
all of you operator people.
So I do believe that being vendor neutral is a goal across all of the work that is being done in the IETF, because even the way the protocols are defined, they are defined such that they will be vendor neutral. Everybody will implement the same thing. If you're talking about vendor-specific extensions, yes, vendor-specific extensions can be supported through vendor augmentations, but we don't want to end up in a place where, a vendor comes along and says, here, take this vendor-specific extension, and it just so happens that it provides the entire functionality the model is trying to provide. That we want to try to avoid, because that is what is going to create double the work on anyone who's trying to program to that interface. And that's what we want to avoid.
Okay, got it. But the IETF doesn't do vendor neutral, by the way, just so you know.
Okay, you can beat me up about that later.
Ina, I was going to bring this up, this is Lou, I'm going to bring this up later, but you said the key word about double the work. And one of the questions, I think, at the end will be is how do we ensure there's not double the work in terms of implementing the models? So, and that goes to the question of alignment of what you're doing here with what we heard from Tarek and what eventually this group presents. So your opinions on that would be great through the whole presentation.
And we will get to that.
Awesome, thank you.
So let's talk about a little bit about the model coverage. So the model covers both the label switch path configuration and the protocol configuration. And the LSP configuration is driven by the type of LSP rather than by the signaling protocol. This is a very similar approach to what you have seen Tarek present just before me. The type of LSP that we are focusing on is traffic engineering capable, non-traffic engineering capable, and static. These are informal names. They are called constraint path and constraint path in the model. Those names are also not very successful. But basically what it tries to convey is like whether you're capable of doing traffic engineering or not. The model lays out a generic framework for LSPs by type, and then protocol-specific configuration also has its place in this model at a different hierarchy level. Next slide, please. So what does it look like? We have the LSP types, and then we have the signaling protocols that can instantiate them. For example, traffic engineering capable LSPs can be instantiated either with ISP PTE or with segment routing. Non-traffic engineering capable, the ones that follow the IGP, shall we say, can be LDP or segment routing. Next slide. So why a data model? So we know why we're here. We know that we need a data model because it enables us to do intent-driven configuration and operation. And if you keep that goal in mind, then you will realize that what you want to do is you want to focus your model around the functionality, the core functionality provided. And the core functionality provided are the LSPs. We don't want to focus the model around, the means by which we achieve these LSPs, around the signaling protocol itself, but rather around the LSPs themselves. I don't think anybody here is changing their RSVP configuration in the network very often, but everybody who's running a traffic engineered network is going to change their LSPs on a regular basis and fiddle with them. Next, please. So what does it look like at a very high level view? And I already warn you that we don't have as detailed slides as Tarek presented, but you can see the full thing in GitHub. There are three main sections: the global section that's specific to the forwarding plane, and we're focusing only on the MPLS forwarding plane. Then we have signaling protocol specific and then LSP specific, and LSPs are structured by their type, constraint path, unconstrained path, and static. where constraint path, you think of them as traffic engineering capable. Even if it is not really traffic engineered, if it is built in a way that it would be traffic engineering capable, then it falls in this category. So all RSVP TLSPs will fall in constraint path, even if they're following just SPF. Next slide, please. So let's look at traffic engineering capable ones, because these are the interesting ones in this group. They are always associated with the path computation method, and they're always associated with path attributes that are specific to TELSPs, such as constraints, bandwidth, and stuff like that. And then there is a path setup, so the protocol-specific information related to how this is set up. Next, please. So let's look at what this would look like for RSVPTE. So for RSVPTE, we will have RSVP-specific attributes like setup, hold, priority. And then we can also have tunnel type specific attributes, whether it's point-to-point, point-to-multipoint. So in summary, this model is providing a structure for configuring both protocols and LSPs. We are in the early stages of the model. This is the first revision of the model, and there's still work to be done. Next. In particular, the next revision is going to see a little reorg, a little reorg of the model, driven by the addition of operational state according to ANIS's operational state model. And we will continue to build out the model, in particular the segment routing section of it and LDP section. And we will publish it to the next revision to the Young repository. ANIS will tell us when in the next few weeks. The current one is already invented. The next one will come in the next few weeks. So after we're done with that, we will go and seek feedback on implementation readiness. As Tarek mentioned, we have also met with the authors of the two drafts SAD that were presented before. And we had a very good conversation, actually realizing that there is a lot of commonality in the approach and in how the general philosophy behind it. And we're going to continue conversations after the IETF to see how we align on the overall structure.
Is there a possibility of combining as opposed to aligning?
I knew you would ask that.
I would be, I wouldn't be doing my job.
So at this time, we are deliberately not combining the drafts, because we want to continue to experiment independently and to explore this independently. And at some later point, I can talk to the possibility.
Yeah. And by the way, combining the models is what I care more about than combining the drafts.
It's the same answer. So we are talking, but at this time, I don't think there is a goal to combine them at this point.
Hi, Tarek from Cisco Systems. Thank you for the presentation. And yes, we will continue to talk. I have a very high-level question. Are you open to, because you have one draft where LDP, RSVP, and other signaling protocols falling into the same module, to breaking them down into separate pieces, or still open? It's still open, kind of.
So actually, we have not explored that,
okay.
So I don't want to just shoot from the hip on it. I don't think there is any religious reason behind it, but we would need to think what makes sense in terms of the structure of how the system.
All right, thanks.
From a overall composite model standpoint, having something that fits all together certainly is where you want to end up. But having them be models that either augment each other or somehow relate to each other would allow the standardization process. Because at some point, people are going to ship code, right? And they're going to want to point to a stable document. And you really want to have, hey, I implement this RSVP TE document and not this LDP document or these different versions. And I sort of feel, personally, I feel like the pace of those documents are going to have to change. You know, it's not going to be a 2-year process to bring out your next revision. It's more going to be like 1.2 to 1.3 type of release. But having the stable reference for implementations sort of drives you towards wanting to allow a separation at some point. Conceptually, it's still one model, but you'll have different pieces that you can reference. Something to think about.
It's something to think about. And I think what this model does, the fact that it puts it all together, it forces a certain way of thinking about it, because you have to think how everything would fit together.
Yeah, and I think...
Once it all fits together, you can split it apart. But
completely agreed, and also the routing area as a whole has recognized that we need to bring that whole picture together. So please don't take my comment as to say don't bring the picture together. We need that. Absolutely agree.
Igor Bursin, Ottawa. On this IETF, I saw presentation, your presentation about service model and how you basically manipulate services, right? And
sorry, say again? Presentation about?
I just heard your presentation, right, about the service models, okay, and OpenConfig expectations with respect to, say, LSP, how you configure protocols. And I also heard model and expectation from OpenConfig with respect to service status, right? So my question is, I haven't heard any actually opinion from OpenConfig with respect to topologies yet. Okay, so have you developed such an opinion or not? Can we have a look at that?
So the answer is no, we do not have a topology model yet.
Okay, so would it be possible, by the way, to have you guys look at what we have produced so far and tell us what we're missing, or is it too much to ask?
Let's go to the mic. This is for you.
Can you relay the response, because I couldn't hear it?
The response was, Rob is already at the mic.
Oh,
so I think that there's two things there. One is, yeah, we can look at it. I think that amongst the operators that are already in OpenConfig, we've had a brief conversation about topology and said, well, we all have our own topology models. Hey, I have about 5. I'm not sure I need another one right now, so there's a bit of a debate as to, is this something we need to pick up on? And the OpenConfig effort as a whole is not planning to be exhaustive about every model, right? So if we don't see a need for it operationally, then maybe we won't look at it, right? We're not guardians of the Yang. The other point I wanted to raise is just this alignment point, right? It's all very nice to align drafts and have things for standards, and yeah, perfect. But actually usability is the first thing. So one of the things I think we've been concentrating on is what are we actually trying to achieve with the network, and then how do we get consistency across the various things we'll be interacting with there. I think that's the most important thing from my view as a consumer of the model and the consumer of needing to configure my network. So I'd rather do that work right now and then look to how we align as and when that, we've tested out some of these approaches against actually using them. The problem with trying to align right now and merge drafts is, yeah, it might get us a standard, but the standard might be unusable.
Fernand from Verizon. Got a question. For this model, the data model, does that covers like for specific use, so like LSPs, there's a time frame for a short period for specific purpose? Then do you think it's a good idea just to add another section, for instance, include a time period for the specific purpose of the LSPs?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow.
Okay.
Oh, bandwidth calendaring.
Yeah,
Oh.
bandwidth, okay. Bandwidth, but this is not bandwidth, this is, say, time, right, for specific, right?
So I think we should discuss the use case, and we can see how it fits.
Yeah, for instance, the use case, say, certain customer or customers, they need a specific time period to send certain traffic from A to Z or Z to A, right? And they specific on, I just want the time for this period, say 2 hours or 2 days, I want this LSP, I built this LSP, I want this bandwidth, and together with bandwidth, right? And then after that, they don't need it, LSP is gone.
So,
And do
So
you think?
I think I'm going to have to ask to take the conversation to the list because we're over.
We should talk about it. As you're explaining this, as I'm thinking about it now, because I haven't thought about this use case before, I wonder if this should be in the model or this should be something that is programmed using the model. So there's an external, so there's a, whether this should be in your application using the model and programming the network, or should it be in the model itself? And it would seem to me, just looking at it for 5 seconds, standing here, that it would be more suited to an.
Yeah, I think I have one. Sorry, you cut?
We're pretty much over on this one. We're actually quite a bit over. So if it is a technical question, I'd ask to bring it to the list. If it is procedural and you really feel you have to talk about it, please say it.
It's a very short comment to the last question.
Then no.
I mean,
that sounds technical to me, and we don't have. I hate to say we don't have time.
One sentence. We're trying to illustrate the building blocks rather than have every detail, figure out in the model.
If that's really the case, then I guess I'd ask, are you willing to take our details? The details produced in the IETF into the model you're working on.
So I think we have thought about this particular thing, and if the structure aligns such that it can be added as an augment to the model, I think that can be a very nice way of doing it forward. So that's to be seen how.
Okay, thanks. Dhruv, you've been very patient, but you're also the next speaker.
Yeah,
so
I think I'm giving up my second, so I'll ask quickly.
Sure.
It's Dhruv. In your document right now, there is no operational state. I just wanted to know in a few lines.
There is none. It was
Yeah, but
we're refactoring right now.
yes, I just want to know what's your thoughts. Are the thoughts similar to what we saw earlier in the like NetBot presentation, where we would like a generic LSP? So maybe it joins the same conversation that I'm going to have next. So while you are on the mic, I wanted to know what's your thought of having a generic LSP in your consolidated model. Does it fit into it? Is it aligned to your way of thinking or not?
I have not thought about it.
Okay, maybe after my presentation.
Thank you.
One administrative point. On the list, there was some discussion about whether or not this draft belongs in TEAS, MPLS, or routing working group, and we thought we were going to discuss it in three different groups. At the beginning of the week, earlier in the week, the ADs said too many common topics are happening to put them all into routing, and it's also breaking things up unnaturally. So discussions that overlap working groups, they've said that they would like to happen in those overlapping working groups, and that the chairs decide how to deal with that overlap. So things like the previous document that covered both MPL and this document that cover both LVP and RSVP, or TE and non-TE LSPs, will work out between TEAS and MPLS, and routing working group isn't going to be in the loop going forward. I think there's still going to be some discussions at this meeting, but going forward we're going to work it out, and no, we have not figured out what that means. But there are going to be more discussions on this in MPLS on Friday.
Hi, this is Dhruv. Next slide, please. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Just jump into it. Next slide. Okay, so when we approached the problem, our aim was that most of the documents are focusing on configuration, and when we thought of how do we start with the operational LSP, is there any reason for us to have a generic LSP, or does every protocol out there goes and define the LSP themselves? There are not enough parameters in common, or should we have
a generic LSP and let every LSP out there augment this model. So this was our initial thinking, and we thought that let's focus only on operational. There is enough discussion already going on in config, and the best way to drive any discussion is write a draft, and we did that, and we got comments, and this is the way we wanted to resolve the situation. The one non-goal that we had, that we were not trying to have a generic signaling protocol, which was what some people thought, that this is somehow a generic signaling protocol Yang work. No, that's not the case. We are just operational state. Is in an operational state of an LSP, is there enough commonality to derive a generic model or not? That was our initial aim. Next slide. I have anyway small time. Can I just cover up? It's just 3 slides.
Okay.
Okay. So this is like some initial work, like 0.0 version. What are the common things between any LSPs out there? Some are maybe management related, maybe creation time, operational time, status, primary. Some are data plane related, which is labels, interfaces, some statistics, relationship with primary and backup, things like that. So this was our just the initial thought of what could be the common elements, and it's not perfect. I got the comments from people that yes, when you augment that, there will be a problem, but that's it. That was the point of writing the draft, to hear the feedback. Next slide, please. So what are the discussions that we have had offline and online regarding that? The biggest discussion was that the commonality between the TE, non-TE, LDP, SR is sort of the data plane. So should this model just be the representation of the MPLS forwarding cross-connect entries and not try to be a generic LSP model? Then the question is, maybe from the point of open config philosophy, is there should every protocol out there define the LSPs on its own term and not do it in a protocol point of view? So that was, I think, the most important discussion point that's open to us, and that will drive whether how we go ahead with this work or not. Of course, we don't think that this is an independent model which will exist on its own. It needs a place. But since other documents were not focusing on operational, we just went ahead and wrote this. And of course, it needs to move either in MPLS common or in a consolidated model state somewhere there. There were also some technical points with respect to Yang modeling, that if you have a generic ID, how do it maps to protocol-specific ID? I had this discussion with other models who are working on generic stuff, like generic OAM in Lime, and also in when we have generic topology, and when you extend it, how does the keys that you have? So there is an open point. I don't have a very clear-cut solution, but I think this is a generic problem that most of the generic model will face. And that's it, and some other with protection and characteristics. So these are the points we want to hear from you. Is this a bad idea? And if it's a bad idea, we'll shut up.
Will you really?
No, but I have to say it.
Yeah. So, Kiriti Kompella, so when you say that this is a operational model, that means post-signaling. Yes. That means, the LSP has been established, how it's been established, and you want to just get back information about what happened.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's a useful thing to say up front, because that might help Lou, or Lou and Pavan.
I'm not sure it helps us, because the prior two take a completely different approach to the same problem. And those two seem to be pretty aligned, actually.
Adrian Farrell. I think there are 3 places in the network you can look at LSPs. There's at a node which is a transit node. There's at a node which is an ingress node from a kind of signaling perspective. And there's the network-wide view that you might see in maybe an LSP database for a PCE. I'm not clear which of those you're trying to hit here. And furthermore, I find that some of the LSP concepts that you have here are I think, informed by the point-to-point traffic engineering view of the world, and it may be easiest and most pragmatic to step back and look at this as an LSP database in the traffic engineering world, and say other things like multi-point to multi-point LDP LSPs are a very different thing to model.
I agree. I heard the same comment from LDP modeling people, and I agree that this is true.
Jeff Haas, so one specific comment is you should move this stuff into groupings. Part of the motivation for that comment is one of the things that the BFD design team for Yang had been tasked with is allowing the Yang configuration elements and operational elements to potentially be reused outside of the BFD modules. So one way to look at the work you're trying to do is if you're to take the bulk of your list and turn it into a grouping, potentially with the changes that Adrian was talking about, so that it applies to the non-point-to-point stuff, you now have a common element that LDP, RSVP, etc. could import into their operational models. It's a common model for doing things. It gives a common naming scheme to things, a common set of effectively underlying data structures, and it helps with code and helps with operator reuse.
Yeah, I agree that in case if it's not a generic model that other people are augmenting, that's definitely the step, that you just have a grouping that can be just used everywhere to make sure that consistent in naming can be done. Completely agree.
Okay. Well, I think it's going. The task is to work to align your work with the prior two discussions.
Yes.
And I think that's a good offline discussion at this point for authors. And what's that? I think no matter what, my comment applies. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. But we're over time on this one again, so we're going to go switch to the next. I'm not sure. Ah, looks like Scott is presenting.
Yes.
And he was even on the agenda. Cool.
Yes. I'll stand in my little box.
And we're a little behind, so if you can compress it all, I
well,
appreciate it.
that depends on the crowd now, doesn't it? I'm Scott Mansfield. I work for Ericsson, and I'm representing the 8 authors from 7 companies that worked on this particular draft. So if you go to the next. The first thing that I'll say is that I am not going to talk about a Yang model. Yay! So I just wanted to provide a quick introduction to a 00 draft that has been submitted as an individual draft. It's called Draft Lamb Keys. You can see that. And what we're doing is providing an introduction to information modeling. And we're providing a rationale behind the benefits, or no, sorry, there's a different draft that provides the benefits for the use of information modeling. But what we're talking about here is work that's going on in other standards bodies. There is a liaison that has a whole lot of details that's also in the slides. So if you go to the next. So what this draft does and doesn't do, I wanted to make very clear that we're not attempting or suggesting that we want to drive the information modeling development in the IETF, unless, of course, the IETF wants to do information modeling. But there seems to be a lot of effort and a lot of momentum behind using the Yang modeling and doing the data modeling in the IETF. But what this draft does do is describes relevant work that is under development outside of the IETF. So it gives you a grander picture of what's going on in other standards bodies in this area. It introduces a work that's been going on for 10 plus years in equipment management, in information modeling. It talks about UML, and it talks about how can we use this kind of multi-stakeholder approach to leverage this expertise that we have in these other organizations and apply it to help out with making the Yang models that are being developed in the IETF more consistent. So, next. So, the background is I wanted to point out that there is already an RFC that talks about what the difference between an information model and a data model is in the IETF. And just at a very high level and just in a short amount of words, we say the key difference is When we're dealing with information modeling, we're really talking about abstract and building classes that you don't instantiate but you inherit from, and then do your instantiation from that. A data model is much more concrete. It's protocol specific. It's either Yang or REST or something else. So next. So the main point of this presentation is to point out what's been going on in the ONF Common Information Modeling work. There is, and trying to just buzz through this because you can read it, you can read the liaison, you can read the draft, so I won't go over all this. But the important thing is that there is a lot of work gone into creating objects and properties and relationships between them in an information modeling way, and that's captured in UML. It's talked about using Papyrus and Eclipse open source tool. The ONF has also done and liaised a lot of effort in creating documents that describe how to use Eclipse, how to use UML, some standards behind the documentation of UML, and they're also beginning to work on a set of tools that show how you convert a UML model into a Yang data model. And so the fragments that they're working on right now, I have a slide that shows all the different fragments. Just to give a couple examples, there's core network model fragments and foundation model. It's all very encapsulated and being done in a very object-oriented way. And then the core network model has relevant bits that are talking about topology. So next slide. So these are some of the terms that they talk about. You may not agree with the way the terms are used. You may agree with the way the terms are used, but this is just to point out that in the world of the ONF and also the ITUT, where some of this work comes from, they talk of forwarding domains, they talk of link and link ends, they talk of logical termination points and topological entities. And these are the basic building blocks they have in the models that are being talked about. So next slide. So this is really difficult to read. So please open it up in your Eclipse tool, or open it up in your PowerPoint there, and you'll see that this looks more like boxes and lines in a UML than this. I don't even know what this looks like, but the point here is to show that if I don't want to leave my box, I want to leave my box. I need a pointer. Over on the far to you, I guess, right side, that shows the various packs or packages. A lot of this work is done using a UML facility capability called packages, where you can bring in these modules of work when you need to use them. So next slide, because that's unreadable anyway. So for further information, I put the pointers to the drafts. The other information I put here is a pointer to the IETF site with the liaison and the documents associated with that liaison that are coming in. And I want to point out that there are, if you don't know how to use Eclipse and Papyrus, or even if you do, there's really some interesting work that's been put in on using UML, using Papyrus, using Eclipse and Papyrus with GitHub. So there's some interesting things in there, even if you've done things before. The modeling files are there, sketches and all sorts of stuff. So next slide. So next steps. This is work that's out there, ready to use. It's been liaised. It is work that could conceivably be used by the routing directorate for Yang. It could be used by TEAS. It could be used. It's out there. We're advertising that the work is there. So you can take a look. And the last 2 points here are, we want to make sure that we engage in the IETF process. We want to talk about, use the mailing list. Use the, provide updates, please do. Yeah. And then just at some point to aspire to be adopted as an informational draft. So.
Yeah, so brief questions, please.
Jeff Haas, I'm here to be a cloud of doom upon you. I2RS was very early in doing a lot of modeling stuff for IETF outside of the work that Lada had been doing for NetMod. We were required to do info models before we were able to start our data models.
Right.
And this means that we have a lot of unfortunate experience in what this means as a actual implementation within IETF context. In terms of info model tools that we previously tried to use, we've started with ABNF, for example, with for our rib model that
Right.
was somewhat clear and was precise for some of the stuff, but we were encouraged to move to something else to cover some other cases. We went to, I want to say RDL, which Adrian had recommended at some point, and that was also not quite the right tool for us. And then it was suggested that we give UML a try, and textual forms of UML simply are not terribly usable in IETF documents. UML gets most of its expressivity from a graphical form.
Right.
So one of the big challenges you're going to have here is, there are some people will have questions about the usefulness of info models at all.
Yes.
In terms of sort of bootstrapping the process of understanding things. The formats that are probably the most useful are ones that do not fit into our existing IETF document stream. Now, we are allowed to do PDFs.
Well, that is,
So I'll be a bit more specific, since I was the one who tried to push UML toward R2S info models. One of our difficulties is IETF documents yet don't have graphic insertion. I've talked to the
You know what? This is like a really
no.
well understood
Yeah.
problem, and we are a little over time on this, so I think the point's been made.
And we should take
so
it.
unless there's a new point here, is there a
yes,
new
there
point?
is. I'll skip all the
Details that we know about.
I'll skip all the details. Let me get to the ask. The ask is, I did find when I used UML that there was actually an ability to detect problems that were not available from the RBNF or from other pieces.
That's correct.
And I did find there was a way to go from UML to Gang models automatically.
That's correct.
I really hope that the Yang coordination people and other people will continue to consider this as a valid tool and technique, because we did find it, and we did find it when we went from info model. So
Benoit's going to be talking a little bit more in the routing working group. It's a good topic to bring up perhaps there. Also, you can hear, he may or may not talk about the ability to go from Yang to UML. So there's some interesting stuff going on with tools back and forth. And on that note, no more UML discussion because we're out of time.
Okay, please also do it for the TE models. Thank
Can I
you.
make one comment since I'm standing up here?
Sure, and please, the next speaker, come on up.
Right. The quick comment is that it is possible to put pretty pictures inside of a RFC, and you do it for other formats other than text. And there are tools that are being put into the RFC toolset that allow you to do that.
Okay, next.
Adrian Farrell, please don't publish an RFC on this. The background material's too fluid, but it's really, really important that you have provided pointers to it. Since it's going to keep moving, it's a wiki page.
That's fine too. Did I? Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, so we are now shifting away from the topic of modeling and Yang, and that portion is now moved to the list. That discussion is moved to the list. We're now going to be talking about ACTN. It's the wrong presentation? 11. Just one moment. You can do the show. We're just going to spend a moment introducing it, and then Young is going to talk. So ACTN is abstraction and control of transport networks. There's been discussion on this for a while. Next slide. There's a whole slew of drafts out there. There was a BOF held in Hawaii, and there was clearly interest in the topic in Hawaii. There were some other parts that were a little less clear, and the AD, or old AD, Adrian, not the new one, Deborah, requested that we discuss how ACTN fits into our working group scope. and you could see the exact words he had for that. And so we think we have some specific questions to ask in this discussion and to discuss. So the objective here is to get information from Young and background information on that is sufficient for us to discuss and try to come to some opinion on this list of questions. And fundamentally is there, I'll rephrase that, what part of the ACTN discussion should we be bringing into T's? Is it all of it? Is it some of it? Is it something else? And so we're going to go through these exact questions after Young speaks.
Okay, thank you. My name is Young Lee. Someone spelled me now Yang, so I'm considering changing my name to Yang Lee. You know, we had a plan to discuss architecture and more information model, but I think after talking to the co-chairs, we realized that this is first time TEAS meeting, and a lot of audience may not be familiar with ACTN, although we had two BOBs in the past. So instead of presenting framework and information model, we took a step back. We are going to talk about requirement only today. What does that mean? We have 8 use case drafts written by operators of various of type, data center provider, traditional large-scale global carriers, and nationwide providers, and so on. So we're going to present basically 10 requirements, synthesized from the requirements spelled by the use cases. So we're not talking about any solution today. Just give you some snapshot of what operator really wants, why they want ACTN work to take off. So if you have a question on requirement, please ask the operators who wrote the requirement. Not to me, but I'm just here to present what the requirements are. Okay, next slide. So this is one overview. What is ACTN? Basically, operators want to have an ability to create a virtual network service based on the virtual networks that meet their service requirement and policy. And one problem they struggle is they are multi-domain in nature. Their endpoint, predominantly data centers, are spread across multi-domain networks. And the problem also, another problem is domain controller has a heterogeneous technology. Some NMS, 80% of transport networks are NMS controlled. Some are GMPLS ASON. And now we have begin to see some open flow based control domain. And also PCE as a SDN controller. A lot of vendors now have a solution for that. So we have heterogeneous transport network domains within a provider networks. And then they want to really have some kind of consolidated view on a virtual level so that they will be able to offer virtual network service on top of their virtual networks. And what is not scoped here is the controller to device is not our concern. We're not talking about GMPLS, ASON, PCE, or NetConf, or OpenFlow, which we term as a southbound. We are talking about above those the domain controller level so that operators can really create virtual network operation environment. Okay.
I think you're going to have to speed up a little, or we're not going to have any discussion time.
Okay. We have 10 requirements. First one is they want to create a single virtualized network topology across these multi-domain networks. As simple as that. And multi-layer, multi-domain topology, abstracted topology from all the physical network controller of various of sorts. They don't care underneath, but they want to have abstracted view and create one single end-to-end view within their domain, multi-domain networks. Next, please. And also, the customer really want to have the ability to provide from customer controller realm to the networks their service requirement and policy. That is conducive to their connectivity that assigned to them. So they really want to have some kind of endpoint selection policy, and endpoint being a data center. They may have a lot of preference and virtual machine mobility constraints that bears with the connectivity. So they really want to enforce that kind of policy within this virtual network service. Next, please. Doing so, I think they want, before they create or instantiate a virtual network per se, they want to be able to see some kind of capability, whether the provider can really provide certain requirements. So they want to really have a virtual query capability from customer to the networks. Like, can you give me virtual networks based on my information, endpoint, and I have a service-specific multi-objective function. Can you fulfill this virtual network for my need? And also, they may also explore diversity. They may want to create multiple virtual networks that may be disjoint to each other so that they know that they have reliability concern met. And also, it can be virtual topology can be type or networks or graph. They may ask some kind of path level abstraction or just link and node type of abstraction. And the response could be, this is virtual network that I can provide you as exactly as you requested, or it could be, this could be more than what you request, but this is residual capacity or a resource available for you. So those things, operators asking this kind of capability. Next. And based on the query, I think next step is simple, virtual network instantiate. Here, I think one characteristic is that the same as the other attribute from query, but they want to have, identifier that identify virtual networks, but also they want to have multiple services on that virtual network. They may want to have another ID that is a subset of a virtual network they are creating. Next, please. And now they recognize that this transport network is very dynamic, especially when it comes to data center environment. So they really want to have a dynamic virtual network control, dynamic and on-demand, modifying virtual networks when they recognize their endpoints, things are changing. That also impacts the network connectivity or virtual network connectivity. So they want to have that kind of very flexibility, and they want to place their policy in place. And in doing so, they want to see some utilization monitoring and abstraction of resource topology reflecting their service-related parameters. Not just link and node, but certain service-related parameters integrated it to be feedback loop to their operation environment so that customer can adapt based on the state. And also network state also based on their endpoint state, because it's a very dynamic environment. Next, please. So they want to have virtual network life cycle management and operation capability, instantiate, delete, modify, and update. Next, please. So we talked about virtual network, but I think eventually what they want to do is that ability to set up and manage end-to-end service on the virtual network, and they term it as a virtual network service, so that they can create any type of service that their ultimate customer wants to create, be able to provide this kind of environment. Next. I think multi-destination coordination. I think what is multi-destination is that for a given source, you may be able to select one destination, but there are other potential destinations if primary destination is not working because of maybe data center, internal data center problem of that destination. So they want to be able to shift source to another destination. And even sometimes if you have a multiple source can be also changed for the connectivity. So those things are really impacting network operation. So they really want to have coordination of multi-destination service, a requirement and the policy to support dynamic applications such as virtual machine migration, disaster recovery, and load balancing across multiple destinations. Next, please. Definitely, I think multi-domain and multi-layer are the nature of transport networks today. So this is one of the most important requirements that at the single point, they want to be able to manage all these different heterogeneous technology on a virtual level so that they can create what the customer really wants. And in doing so, I think we believe that there are some signaling implication to coordinate multi-domain and multi-layer, and also a domain sequence problem based on some policy. And so that's kind of a very important requirement. Next, please. This is last requirement, also end-to-end path restoration capability across multi-domain and multi-layer networks. And they may allow intra-domain recovery, if not cross-domain recovery, so that one domain failure will not impact the service that the customer created, so that it will be transparent, and also customer may impose their preference as to whether they want to have one plus one protection or some kind of dynamic recovery. Those things should be propagated from all the way from customer to the networks, and network need to translate that and map into the southbound technology that we have. Next, please. So now I just elaborated only 10 requirements. It's a synthetic analysis based on 8 use cases. So it was a kind of daunting task, but the authors believe that we kind of did a good job, but there might be some missing requirements. Operator may say, oh, you forget some things, but at least we try to give, represent those 8 different use cases into 10. So based on that requirement, we want to ask, would that fit into the TIS working group? And if yes, we can get on with the work here, at least those requirements, and also the framework. We have actually, if you look at the page, IETF page, we actually produced also a framework document. So. Which is basically the use case. It's just another, the synthesis based on the use case. We put some, elements there. We're not saying that's the static, but so is that fit into TIS working group? And then we plan to produce info model and data model, and also we will evaluate protocol candidates. What kind of protocol will meet to fulfill this requirement. It's very early stage, but we haven't thought about it detail, but it will come once we know that we have info model and data model. Okay.
So here are the questions that we talked about. I'm going to, whoops, you would back one. To start the discussion, I'm actually going to ask a clarifying question. Why isn't this just, and sorry to say it, why isn't it just part of the Yang model work we were discussing?
Yeah. Why is just the Yang model?
Yeah, why not? I mean, it seems like all the requirements you're talking about, maybe we haven't worked out all the details, but almost all of them seem to fit in with the discussions we've just been hearing about.
Yeah. I think you are jumping into solution, right? Because Yang is NetConf implied. I don't think so. Not, there's differences there.
Okay.
Okay. So actually, what would be really helpful, it's Igor Briskin, what would be really helpful is a good gap analysis document from ICTN folks, okay, that would basically account for everything that we are trying to do now, all this, like for example, say I would like to see why is it that, say, the topology model and service model and, say, OM model and policy models that people work in this and other groups is not good enough for ACTN. Okay, so from this document, it would be a lot easier to discuss what we can do, what we should do with ACTN in the future.
Actually, there's a problem statement draft, which might be expired by now, but that talks about the gap analysis. So we don't put as a title gap, but it's there, so why don't you take a look to see if that meets your question.
The important part here is to account for current development, what we're doing right now, okay? So that we will not repeat the same effort several times on different levels, right? Like for example, say we just started to do topology modeling, and we just started to do service modeling, and it could be very well that whatever we are doing now, or which we'll have eventually, would be just good enough for all your goals.
Yes, I mean, that's exactly, I mean, you started topology model, but we are saying that there is more than just topology model, service model and policy model. That's what we are proposing, but we're not necessarily tied with Yang per se at this moment, because customer really want to have very dynamic environment, whether net counts will fit in, because they're not talking about management model per se. They really want to have a control plane type of model that can, that can adapt to the changes of the networks and also their virtual network. So I think, why just Yang model in terms of, Yang scope? We can define service model and policy and others, but I think it comes down to performance issues. That's why we say we are going to evaluate whether the net count, once this work is adopted here, it's good enough, or if not, why not? And then we go from there.
You just said a moment ago that you're also interested in a control plane based model. So are you thinking more Uni and EN and I?
But Uni and EN and I?
Yeah, because those are service interfaces, right, that we've worked on in the past. For control plane based
no, I don't think
provisioning.
Customer wants that particular interface per se.
Okay.
And because we are talking about not just GMPLS, we are talking about NMS and PCE and OpenFlow as a southbound. So if you talk about UNI, ENNI, you are limiting yourself to GMPLS ASON. So I think we have to be really careful. I think it's only a subset of interface that can talk to customer. So you have to understand the heterogeneity of multi-domain.
I haven't read the requirements document. It just came out, actually, right? This week.
Yes,
So,
please read.
I haven't read it, but it would be good if it covered some of this some of these requirements that you're alluding to here. I don't know if it already does or not, but it's worth taking a look at it. From switching hats for a minute, that was sort of as an individual contributor that I was making those comments. As chair, and going back to these questions, the interesting thing is that these questions are, how do the pieces that we're working on fit ACTN? And so it's really a discussion of, with an implication that ACTN fits in working group scope. At least that's my takeaway from here as chair. So. Sorry, I got there in a weird way. The discussion that we just had here really seemed to imply to me, with chair hat on, that we're talking about what mechanisms are we already working on that can satisfy ACTN. So that says that there's definitely some scope overlap. Because if there wasn't scope overlap, we would just be sitting having silence or, kicking him out of the room. We're not doing that. We're trying to say, okay, we have this mechanism. Let's make our mechanism that we're working on here fit. It says we're in scope. So I think we've just answered the first question as yes. And if anyone disagrees, I'd like to hear that now. That there's at least... some. That at least some part of ACTN is within scope of this working group.
Andy Malice. I would actually like to expand that and...
We'll get there. I was just on the very... That's question one.
Yeah, so just staying on question one for a minute.
We only have like 2 minutes on the topic.
Okay, thanks. I was at both of the ACTN BOSS, and I think that, based on the material and the requirements that was discussed at the BOSS, I would like to say that my own personal opinion is that everything that's been discussed with ACTN to date um, fits within Clause E of the TEAS Charter. So if you want to look back at Clause E in the TEAS Charter, it's just my own personal opinion that it all fits there, and really isn't any question about it.
Okay. So we didn't get any objections. Just to be a little more formal, I can't hear noises so well, so I'm going to ask for hands. How many think that that a portion, or even all, but a portion of the ACTN is within the scope of our activities here in TEAS? How many think it's not? So I was going to say we had most of the room for the first question and one person for the second, but the one person was actually reading email or something. I didn't notice that I changed the question, so we had 0 objections. I think that's a pretty clear support for looking at this more in depth for the working group.
The requirement document per se, because that's what I presented.
So
today.
I was going to say this requirement document is new. I'd like to I'd like to see it maybe revised. If you think it's revised, great. You know, to cover some of the is it signaling that we're talking about? Is it not signaling? Right. Make those requirements clear, and then to look at that as a requirements document for the working group and for working group adoption. First, we need to make sure the revision, then we'll have some discussion. Just the requirements document at this point is what we're talking about. Any comments? All right, so we're going to move topics now.
Okay.
I know we didn't get through all the questions, but I think that's as much as we can really do right now. Young, any last words?
No.
Okay, thank you. So we have 3 talks in 15 minutes, or a little less than 15 minutes. First 2 are Pavan, and we'll have one more at the end.
It's a totally different topic. I had a grand introduction plan, but I'll try to condense that. This draft proposes a cohesive set of RSVPT scalability recommendations. These were put together to cater to scaling demands for MPLS RSVPT LSPs, but since most of them had generic applicability, we were asked to bring it to TEAS. We all know what the problems are. RSVPT scalability is a topic that's been well discussed on multiple platforms. Everybody knows that to improve scalability, you would need to bring down the rate of RSVPT messages that you process to a very minimum. RFC 2961, the refresh reduction extensions that are proposed, they substantially help the cause. They have been helping implementations achieve, cater to these scaling needs. But these scaling demands have been growing rapidly, growing as rapidly as they ever have been. And it's time we refine some of these recommendations to cater to these growing demands. What this draft proposes are basically 3 things. One is to completely eliminate the reliance on refreshes for state synchronization. 2, completely eliminate reliance on refresh timeouts for state states cleanup. And 3, to do per peer flow control. The notion of refresh independent RSVP is not new. RFC 2961 and RFC 5439 both talk about having a larger refresh interval, but they do warn about the loss of functionality that comes with it. There has also been some work in the NSIS working group about getting rid of refreshes altogether and making RSVP run over TCP. What this draft does is bring back this notion of RSVP refresh independence back. It talks about having a very large refresh interval, but it also proposes some recommendations that will make sure that there's no loss of functionality. So basically, using these recommendations in implementation can take the original recommendations, take some of the enhancements that have been made over the years, make a few procedural adjustments, and then equip itself to cater to these scaling demands. Next slide, please. The first set of recommendations talk about eliminating the reliance on refreshers. The first one is fairly obvious. Most implementations do that already. The second is to indicate support for refresh reduction by default. The draft recommends making RSVP default by RSVP scalable by default, so that's why it's there. The third one is the important one. We recommend making the refresh interval be a large value. So if you are not relying on refreshes anymore, the RSVP refresh interval is kind of becomes analogous to your OSPF LSA refresh interval, which is in the order of tens of minutes. So we are proposing a default value of 20 minutes. Next slide, please. The second set of recommendations talk about eliminating the reliance on refresh timeouts. The first recommendation there is something that most implementations currently don't do. So we recommend implementing reliable delivery for TACE and error messages as well. 2961 does talk about it, but most implementations chose not to do that. Because we are not relying on refresh timeouts to clean up state anymore, we are suggesting coupling the state of individual LSPs with the state of the corresponding signaling adjacency. So if you're an RSVP TE speaker and your signaling adjacency goes down, the recommendation is to clean up all the LSPs that are affected by the signaling adjacency failure. The draft recommends the use of node ID based hello sessions to detect the signaling adjacency failures, and it also proposes using 9 seconds for your node hello interval. So that comes down to 3.5 times 9 seconds is 31.5 seconds for your hello timeout. So FRR bypass as defined in RFC 4090 currently it relies on refresh timeouts for some of the procedures to work. There's a draft that was introduced at the last IETF in the MPLS working group, and the next version of which would be presented tomorrow. It talks about refresh interval independent FRR bypass. This draft recommends implementing those procedures. Next slide, please. The third set of recommendations is to do per peer flow control. It recommends using the lack of acts from a peer as an indication of control plane congestion and to throttle messages to the affected peer. Exponential backoff is recommended with a retry limit of 7, and the recommendation for the node which detects the congestion is to prioritize tears and errors over paths and registries. Next slide, please. These are the remaining set of recommendations in this draft, the fairly so as per 2961 acknowledgements are mandatory. This draft proposes always sending a message ID ACK when you get a message ID with the ACK desired flag set. There's some ambiguity surrounding the use of rapid retry limit, what to do when it's reached. This draft tries to provide some guidance and make it consistent across the board. So for TACE and errors, there's no further action, but for paths and registries, the recommendation is to have a retransmission limit of 30 seconds. Yeah, the next two are specific to MPLS, RSVP, LSPs. Yeah, you can go through that when you get a chance.
Yeah. Short comment?
Yes. Do you think those extensions apply? Pavel Brzezowski from ADVA. Do you think those extensions apply to other networks and packet networks?
So these were put together primarily for MPLS LSPs. We didn't plan on, we didn't do any study how that applies to non-packet, non-PSC LSPs. But since most of them are generic, it's kind of useful to see how those apply.
So my experience is most are already done in transport networks also. So it would be.
You think people remove state when the node hellos are not there?
I didn't say all. I said most. So I think we certainly, if this comes into the working group, we would want to make sure that it would cover the full scope of applications of RSVP.
I guess my question is, if it applies only to packet, should it be in TEAS or MPLS? That was the question.
If we're going to do that type of document, it should be across all the use cases of RSVP TE, and that belongs in the AS part of TEAS.
Okay, thank you.
Or S part, sorry. So the next document was also pretty similar. You've used all your time. For
So
both?
then I'll just add a couple of lines on that. I'll not present it. So it talks about a specific implementation issue associated with RSCP setup retry timer. The draft is fairly self-explanatory. It talks about the issue and makes some recommendations. Please do go through it. And if you have any questions, take it to the mailing list. Thanks.
So just a question on both of these. You can leave the mic over there. Is the intent to do informational BCP or modify procedures, which would mean PS?
I don't have a strong opinion either way. In the first document, there are some changes in semantics. So you could argue it's informational.
Changes in semantics means it's not informational.
Rob Shakir, BT, I would like to see them be standard rather than informational, because I think they're really important for making this technology usable rather than just some information around it.
Okay, so it could be a BCP if we're not changing anything in the actual protocol, and that would be most appropriate. I think bringing them to the working group is very good. I think we should see versions that cover the full scope of use of RSVP-TE, and then discuss on the list whether we want to bring them in as working group documents. Last question on this topic, because we're over time. And if it's really quick, George.
Well, I have two technical comments.
Then take them to the list, please.
Well, I just want to say what they are. So in section 2.3, you say you should immediately, in section 2.3, you say you should always respond to every act. And
George, please, to the list.
okay.
Even though we're running late, we're still in session. This is the last talk.
Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to talk
folks, if you're not interested in what's being presented, please leave the room. The background noise is too loud. Andy, too loud.
So today I'm going to talk about the TE-LSP crossing topology transparent zone. So next slide. Next one. So firstly, introduction to IGP TDZ, and then establish TE-LSP crossing TDZ. Next one. So TDZ virtualize a part of network as the edges of this part fully connected. So after virtualization, on any node outside of TDZ, you just see the virtualized topologies, such as the topology at the up of this part. So for any node inside the TDZ, you see the whole topology as before. So next slide. So this slide is animated view of TDZ from IGP's point of view. Next one. So next slide. So after we have virtualized the topology, so from any node outside, we can set up LSP crossing TDZ to any node outside. So when we do set up LSP crossing this cloud or TDZ, so on any node outside, the behavior is same as before. So next. So only on the edge of this cloud, they have some kind of procedure changes. So next slide. So on this edge, so on this source node, the computer pass as normal, and then signaling as also as normal. So when pass message reach to this edge, so this edge node will compute a pass segment from this edge to the other edge, and then use this topology inside this cloud. So with that pass segment, and then we continue signaling the LSP. So the change is that when we send a reserve message from this node to outside, we will not send those labels inside this topology. We just put one label for this from this node to outside. So just like from outside of node, it only see one hop. So for this edge node, when it sends the pass message to its next hop, so it will also hide the inside topology. It will only send one hop from here to here to the pass message if we have ERO, we have pass record. So that's only the change on these two edges. So other than that, there's no change. So next slide. Yeah, that's all. That's all. So next one. So this is the first version, and then we would like comments.
Just to refresh folks who weren't in OSPF, our then AD, who's no longer AD, said that if we were going to do this work, we have to first have an understanding of how TTZ works with traffic engineering in general. So it sounds like you need another document first.
Yeah, we have a document in OSPF.
Right, so we need a third document
Yeah.
that talks about how TTZ works with traffic engineering. That covers not the details of RSVP and OSPF, but the overall topic.
Okay, okay.
And at least that's how I interpreted the then AD's comment, and I'll give a quick opportunity for an AD to jump up. She's not jumping up, so I think you have to address that comment before we can really get into the details, either here with RSVP or there with OSPF.
Okay,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know it was a packed session. I appreciate you coming and contributing to the first session at TEAS. See you in Prague. And pass the blue sheets up, please.
Is there any agreement for the lunch? Could you have a lunch together? I want to discuss some key ideas with you. Your comments.
We can do it afterwards.
Okay, no problem. Evening. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I